I finalized the character arcs and plot points. The setting is a struggling farm, providing the perfect backdrop for forced proximity and shared vulnerability. The slow-burn romance will be built through shared tasks, quiet moments, and sensory details, focusing on Joe's internal monologue. The twists are designed to be emotional reveals, escalating the stakes and deepening the connection between Joe and Alara. I'm ready to begin writing, ensuring the narrative adheres to the strict word count and structural requirements. I'm particularly excited to write the fix-me-first moment, making it both a literal and metaphorical turning point. The resolution will be practical and hopeful, showing a concrete step forward for the couple. The final step will be crafting the outro with the required call to action. Let's start. I'm confident I can deliver a compelling story that meets all the specifications. I will start writing the story now. I was done with women. Done with the way they could dismantle you with a single, well-placed word, the way their scent could linger on your pillowcase for weeks, a ghost you couldn't exorcise. After Sarah, I had rebuilt my life into a fortress of solitude, its walls mortared with grease and diesel fuel. My world was logical, mechanical. Engines made sense. They broke, you diagnosed the problem, you sourced the parts, you fixed it. People, especially women, were a chaotic system of faulty wiring and unpredictable leaks I no longer had the tools or the will to repair. I wasn't looking for another woman. I was actively running in the opposite direction, my boots pounding against the pavement of a life I was determined to live alone. My sanctuary was the cab of my truck, a rolling kingdom of wrenches and rags, the air thick with the honest smell of oil. It was this sanctuary that brought me deep into the rolling, forgotten hills where the cell signal went to die. The call had been a crackle of static and desperation, a vintage tractor, a lifeline for a farm on the brink. When I finally navigated the rutted dirt road, the farmhouse that emerged from the dusk looked as tired as I felt. Its paint was a peeling memory, its posture a weary slump against the bruised twilight sky. And then I saw her, standing on the porch, a silhouette against the single golden light spilling from a window. She didn't move as I killed the engine, just watched. Her stillness a stark contrast to the frantic energy I'd felt over the phone. As I stepped out, the air changed. It wasn't just the cool evening settling in. It was the scent of damp earth, hay, and something else. Something clean and sharp, like ozone after a storm. It was the smell of her. Her name was Alara. She said it without preamble, her voice low and steady, a river running over smooth stones. She was taller than I'd expected, with broad shoulders that spoke of a life spent lifting and carrying. Her hair was pulled back in a messy braid that had likely started the day neat, and her face was a study in planes and shadows, smudged with dirt on one cheek. But it was her hands that held my attention. They were resting on the porch rail, long-fingered and capable, with clean, short nails but knuckles that were scraped raw. These were not hands that waited for things to be done. These were hands that did the doing. "You're Joe," she stated, not a question. Last I checked, my voice came out rougher than I intended, a defense mechanism clicking into place. I hoisted my heavy diagnostic kit from the passenger seat. "Let's see the patient." She gave a small, humorless smile that didn't reach her eyes. They were the color of moss, deep and shadowed, and they held a weariness that resonated with a painful chord deep inside me. "She's in the barn. And she's not just sick, she's dying." We walked in silence, the crunch of gravel under my boots the only sound. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the hulking shape of the barn, trying to ignore the magnetic pull of the woman walking beside me. It was a familiar, terrifying feeling, a compass needle swinging toward a pole I'd sworn to avoid. In the cavernous, sweet-smelling dark of the barn, the tractor stood like a monument to a bygone era, a hulking beast of faded green metal. It was beautiful in a stubborn, obsolete way. I spent the first hour in near silence, my world shrinking to the feel of cold steel under my fingers. I worked methodically, letting the familiar process soothe the unwelcome flutter in my chest. Alara didn't hover. She leaned against a support beam a respectful distance away, arms crossed, watching. Her silence was more unnerving than 1,000 questions would have been. It was an observant silence, a patient silence. I could feel her gaze on my back, on my hands as I checked the fuel lines, on the tense set of my shoulders. It made the small space feel charged, intimate. "It's the injection pump," I finally announced, wiping my greasy hands on a rag. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "It's shot. Completely seized." She didn't flinch. Her expression remained unreadable. "Can you fix it?" "Fix it? No. It needs to be rebuilt or replaced. And a pump for a machine this old." I trailed off, letting her fill in the blank. "It wouldn't be easy to find. It would take time." "How much time?" "A few days to source a rebuilt one if I'm lucky. A week, maybe more." She finally looked away, her gaze drifting over the cavernous space of her barn, at the bales of hay stacked high, at the quiet stalls. The setting sun sent a final, dusty shaft of light through a high window, illuminating the worry that now settled plainly on her face. Her pride was a palpable thing, a shield she held up against the world, but I could see the cracks forming. "I don't have a week," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The statement was so quiet, so full of despair, it felt like a confession. "Look, I can start making calls in the morning," I said, my professional tone a thin veneer over a sudden, sharp pang of something that felt dangerously like empathy. "But for tonight, there's nothing more I can do." "You'll need to stay then," she said, turning back to me. It wasn't an invitation. It was a fact. Her gaze was direct, unwavering. "The nearest motel is over an hour away. I have a spare room." My internal alarms shrieked. A spare room. A whole night under the same roof. The walls of my carefully constructed fortress felt paper-thin. "I can sleep in my truck." A flicker of something, annoyance, disappointment, crossed her face before it was gone. "Don't be ridiculous. You can't fix my tractor if you've put your back out sleeping in a truck seat. Come inside. I'll make us some dinner." She didn't wait for an answer, just turned and walked toward the house, her stride sure and steady, as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion. And the worst part was she was right. I was trapped. Trapped by a broken machine and a woman whose quiet gravity was already threatening to pull my entire, carefully ordered universe off its axis. The farmhouse kitchen was the warmest room in the house, both in temperature and in feeling. A large wooden table, scarred with the history of 100,000 meals, dominated the space. It smelled of yeast and old wood. Alara moved with an economy of motion that I, a mechanic, could appreciate. There were no wasted steps, no hesitation. She pulled vegetables from a basket, her knife work quick and precise. I stood awkwardly in the doorway, my heavy toolkit feeling like an anchor. "You can put that down," she said without turning around. "It's not going anywhere." I set the kit by the door and washed my hands at the deep farmhouse sink, scrubbing at the grease under my nails. The soap smelled of lavender, a scent so jarringly gentle in this world of rust and earth that it stopped me for a second. It was her scent, I realized, the clean note I'd smelled outside. Dinner was a quiet affair. A simple stew, but it was hearty and delicious. I ate like I hadn't seen food in a week, trying to focus on the meal, on the grain of the wood table, on anything but the woman across from me. But my eyes kept betraying me. Snagging on the way, a stray piece of hair fell across her forehead. The determined set of her jaw, the slight wince she made when she lifted her bowl with her left hand. "You're hurt," I said, the words out before I could stop them. She glanced down at her hand as if just noticing it. A nasty, half-healed gash ran across her palm, the skin around it red and angry. "It's nothing. Fins guire. It looks infected. You should have it looked at." "The animals get looked at. I get what's left over," she said, her tone flat, dismissing the topic. She stood and began clearing the plates, her movements stiff. It was a clear signal, mind your own business. I was the mechanic. I was here to fix the machine, not the operator. My job had boundaries. My life had boundaries. I needed to remember that. The spare room was clean but stark, furnished with a simple iron bedstead and a patchwork quilt that looked ancient. Lying in the dark, I could hear the house settle around me. the groan of old wood, the sigh of the wind against the windows. It was a lonely sound, one I was intimately familiar with. But tonight it felt different. It wasn't just my own loneliness I was hearing. It was the house's. It was hers. I thought of Sarah, of the sterile white apartment we'd shared, how its silence had been one of absence, of things left unsaid. This silence was different. It was heavy, weighted with history and unspoken struggle. I fell asleep thinking of Alara's injured hand, of the stubborn pride that kept her from tending to her own wounds. The next day, I became a fixture in her barn. I spent hours on the phone, hunched over the tractor's engine block, calling salvage yards and specialty suppliers across 3 states. Each call was a dead end, a polite sorry, can't help you with each rejection. The tension in the barn grew thicker. Alara worked around me, mucking out stalls, hauling feed, her movements a constant, silent rhythm of labor. I found myself watching her more than I watched the phone. I watched the muscles in her back ripple as she hoisted a bale of hay. I watched the gentle way she spoke to her aging dairy cows, her voice a low murmur that calmed them instantly. She never asked for an update. She just worked, her face set in a stoic mask. But I could see the strain in the tight line of her mouth, the exhaustion in the slight slump of her shoulders at the end of the day. This farm wasn't a hobby. It was her entire world, and I was watching it grind to a halt. Nothing yet, I'd say each evening as we sat down for another quiet dinner. Tomorrow, then, she'd reply, her voice even betraying nothing. But her eyes told a different story. On the 3rd afternoon, a breakthrough. A yard in Wisconsin had a pump. It was used, rebuilt, no guarantees, but it was a pump. The problem was they wouldn't ship it. It was pickup only. Wisconsin was a 16-hour drive, round trip. I found Alara in the pasture, leaning against a fence post, staring out at the fields that were just beginning to turn gold. Her fields. The ones she couldn't harvest. I found one, I said, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine hope in her eyes. It was like watching the sun break through heavy cloud cover, and it made my breath catch. Then I told her the catch. The hope vanished, extinguished as quickly as it had appeared. I see. She pushed herself off the post, her whole body slumping. I can't afford the gas to get there. Let alone what they're asking for the part. Her voice cracked on the last word, a tiny fissure in her armor of self-reliance. She turned away, but not before I saw the glisten of tears in her eyes. This whole place, it's hanging on by a thread, Joe. My parents left it to me, and I'm running it into the ground. That tractor is the only thing standing between me and losing everything. It was the first real piece of her she had offered me. Not the stoic farmer, not the capable landowner, but the terrified daughter afraid of failing the memory of her parents. My carefully constructed walls, the ones I'd built to keep women and their complicated emotions out, crumbled to dust in that moment. I'll go, I said. I'll cover the part. You can pay me back when you get the crop in. She spun around, her face a mixture of shock and suspicion. Why would you do that? Because, I said, searching for an honest answer that didn't sound like, because something about you is undoing me. I'm a mechanic, and I finish the jobs I start. It was a half-truth, but it was the only one I could offer. Her stare was intense, searching my face for the fine print, the hidden clause. I met her gaze, holding it, letting her see that there wasn't one. Okay, she breathed, the word a puff of surrender. Okay. That night, a storm rolled in, a wild, furious thing that threw rain against the windows like handfuls of gravel. The power flickered and died, plunging the house into a sudden, profound darkness. Alara lit a few kerosene lamps, their flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. We sat in the living room, the storm raging outside, the silence inside charged with everything that had passed between us that afternoon. Tell me about her, Alara said suddenly, her voice soft in the dim light. Her who? I knew exactly who she meant. The woman you're running from. The question was so direct, so gentle, it bypassed all my defenses. I found myself telling her about Sarah, about the art galleries and the brunch dates and the beautiful, hollow shell of a relationship that had looked perfect from the outside. I told her how Sarah had left, not with a bang, but with a quiet, dismissive text message that had invalidated our entire 2 years together. I told her how it had made me feel like a machine that had been stripped for parts no longer useful. When I finished, my voice raw, the room was silent save for the drumming of the rain. Alara didn't offer platitudes or easy comfort. She just listened. Then, she reached across the small space between us on the worn sofa and laid her hand on my arm. Her touch was hesitant, but firm. Her skin was warm, the calluses on her palm a rough, grounding texture against my skin. "You're not a machine, Joe," she said softly. "You're the mechanic. There's a difference." Her thumb stroked my arm, a small, repetitive motion that sent a jolt straight to my core. I looked from her hand to her face. In the flickering lamplight, her eyes were dark pools, reflecting the flame. The air grew thick, heavy. This was it. The moment where the world tilts on its axis, where a touch is no longer just a touch. It was the turn. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, wild beat that matched the storm outside. Her gaze dropped to my lips, and I knew, with a certainty that terrified and thrilled me, that she felt it too. The space between us shrank until I could feel the warmth of her breath, smell the lavender and the rain on her skin. It was an almost moment, a breath held in anticipation, a question hanging in the charged air. But then a log in the fireplace shifted and collapsed with a loud crack, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. The spell broke. Alara pulled her hand back as if burned, a flush creeping up her neck. I cleared my throat, the sound unnaturally loud. I should get some sleep," I stammered. "Long drive tomorrow." "Yes," she said, her voice tight. "You should." Neither of us moved. The tension remained, a live wire crackling between us. Every instinct screamed at me to stay, to close that tiny distance, to find out what would happen if I didn't run. But the ghost of Sarah, the memory of that gut-wrenching pain, was a cold hand on my shoulder. I was the one who fixed things, not the one who broke them. And I had a feeling that if I stayed on that couch, something between us would break wide open, and I wasn't sure either of us would survive it. The drive to Wisconsin was a blur of highway hypnosis and caffeine. My mind wasn't on the road. It was back in that dimly lit living room, replaying that moment, the feel of her calloused thumb on my skin, the look in her eyes. The 16 hours felt like an eternity and no time at all. When I finally returned, the new pump heavy on the passenger seat, the storm had passed, leaving the air washed clean and the farm glistening under a pale sun. Alara was waiting in the barn. She looked like she hadn't slept. There were dark circles under her eyes, but she straightened up when she saw me, her mask of stoicism firmly back in place. "You got it," she said, her eyes fixed on the precious cargo in my arms. "I got it." We worked together to install it, a silent, focused dance of wrenches and gaskets. Our hands brushed, our shoulders bumped in the tight space around the engine. Each touch was an electric shock, a reminder of the night before. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the raw, undeniable attraction that now hummed between us. It was maddening. I wanted to grab her, to shake her, to demand what she was thinking. I wanted to press her against the cool metal of the tractor and kiss her until neither of us could breathe. Instead, I tightened a bolt until my knuckles were white. Finally, it was done. I wiped my hands and stepped back. That should do it. Turn the key. She climbed into the driver's seat, her movements hesitant. She looked at me, her moss-green eyes wide with a mixture of hope and fear. I gave her a nod. She turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed once, twice, and then roared to life with a plume of black smoke. The sound was deafening, beautiful, a symphony of controlled combustion. It was the sound of hope. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Alara's face, transforming her. It was the first real smile I had seen from her, and it lit up the entire barn. It lit up my entire world. She cut the engine and practically jumped down from the seat, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You did it?" she breathed, closing the space between us. "You actually did it." Before I could process it, her arms were around my neck, pulling me into a hug. She was strong, solid, and she smelled of diesel and damp earth and that faint, clean scent of lavender. My own arms, of their own volition, wrapped around her waist, holding her tight. It wasn't a tentative hug. It was a desperate, grateful collision. My face was buried in the crook of her neck, and for a moment, I let myself just be held. I let the fortress fall. When she pulled back, her hands remained on my shoulders, her thumbs tracing my collarbones. Her smile had faded, replaced by an expression of raw vulnerability. "The tractor's fixed," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But I'm not." She looked down at her injured hand, which she'd been favoring all day. Then she looked back at me, her gaze piercing. "You're so good at fixing things that are broken, Joe." My heart stopped. This was it. The moment of truth. The air crackled. The world narrowed to the space between her eyes and mine. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a harsh, intrusive sound that shattered the moment. I cursed under my breath, pulling it out. The screen read, "Jenna, my sister." I ignored it, but it immediately started ringing again. "You should get that," Alara said, stepping back, the connection broken. The mask was already sliding back into place. "It's nothing," I said, but the urgency was gone. The bubble had burst. I answered, turning away from her. "Jenna, not a good time." "Where the hell are you, Joe?" Her voice was sharp, laced with the familiar, overbearing concern that always felt more like judgment. "Your landlord called. Said you haven't been back to your apartment in days. You're not doing something stupid, are you? Please don't tell me you've holed up somewhere because of another situation. You know what happened with Sarah. You can't just run away and hide on some farm." Every word was a hammer blow, rebuilding the walls around my heart brick by painful brick. She was right. What was I doing? I was a mechanic. I had a job to do. I'd done it. Playing house with a beautiful, broken farmer in the middle of nowhere wasn't part of the deal. It was a fantasy, a dangerous one. "I'm fine, Jenna. I'm finishing a job," I said, my voice cold, clipped. "I'll be home tomorrow." I hung up without saying goodbye and turned back to Alara. She was standing by the workbench, her back to me, her shoulders rigid. The light from the barn door haloed her, but she looked a million miles away. "So," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Home tomorrow." "Yeah," I mumbled, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Got to get back." "Of course," she said. "You have a life to get back to." The silence that followed was worse than any argument. It was a chasm opening between us, filled with my cowardice and her disappointment. I had fixed her tractor. I had given her a chance to save her farm. And now I was going to walk away, leaving her just as broken as I'd found her, and leaving myself even more so. I had done my job, and in the process I had systematically dismantled myself. That evening, the final dinner was an exercise in agony. We moved around each other in the kitchen, two ghosts haunting the same space. The air was so thick with unspoken feelings I could barely breathe. I packed my bag, the simple act of folding my clothes feeling like a betrayal. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay, to turn around, to say something, anything. But the fear, cold and familiar, had its hooks in me again. Fear of being dismantled. Fear of being left. Fear of wanting something this much. I was standing by the front door, my toolkit in hand, trying to formulate a goodbye that didn't sound as hollow as I felt. Alara was at the sink, her back to me. "The check for the pump is on the table," she said, her voice tight. "And for your labor." "Alara," I started, but my throat closed up. She finally turned, wiping her hands on a towel. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed. "Thank you, Joe, for everything. You saved my farm." "I just go," she whispered, and the words were a clean cut, severing the last thread between us. Her eyes pleaded with me, "Don't make this harder than it already is." I turned and walked out the door, closing it softly behind me. The night was cool and clear, the sky littered with an impossible number of stars. I walked to my truck, my boots heavy as lead. I threw my gear in the back. My hand was on the door handle. This was it. I could get in, drive away, and put this all behind me. I could go back to my fortress, to my engines, to my safe, lonely life. I could pretend the last few days never happened, that I never felt the warmth of her hand or saw the hope in her eyes. But I knew I couldn't. I would be running for the rest of my life, not from Sarah, but from the memory of Alara, from the ghost of what I was too afraid to claim. My sister's voice echoed in my head. "You can't just run away." She was right, but for all the wrong reasons. Running away wasn't leaving the farm. Running away was getting in this truck. I took my hand off the door. I turned around and looked at the farmhouse, at the single warm, golden light in the kitchen window. I thought of her standing in there alone, her fierce pride her only companion. I thought of her injured hand, her broken heart, her quiet strength. I thought of her plea, "Fix me first." She hadn't been talking about her hand. She had been asking me to see her, the woman behind the farmer, the person drowning under the weight of it all. She had been asking me to stay. I walked back up the path, my steps certain. I didn't knock. I opened the door and stepped back inside. She was still standing at the sink, her head bowed, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She hadn't heard me come in. I crossed the room in 3 strides and gently touched her arm. She flinched, spinning around, her eyes wide and wet with tears. When she saw me, a strangled gasp escaped her lips. "Yo. What are you?" "I'm an idiot," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm a coward, and I can't leave." I stepped closer, framing her face with my hands, my thumbs wiping away her tears. Her skin was so soft. "My whole life I've been fixing things so I don't have to feel things. But you, I feel everything with you, and it scares the hell out of me. But leaving scares me more." Her breath hitched. Her moss-green eyes searched mine, looking for the truth. She found it there. "The harvest is coming up," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You can't possibly do it alone. You need help. You need a mechanic." To keep things running, it was a flimsy excuse, a practical solution to an emotional problem, but it was a start. It was a plan. I would stay. I would help her. We would figure out the money later. We would figure out us as we went. A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time, she was smiling. A real, trembling, hopeful smile. "Is that what you are?" she whispered. "My mechanic. For as long as you'll have me," I said. And then I closed the final inch between us and kissed her. It was a kiss of rain and earth, of lavender and diesel, of desperation and relief. It was the feeling of coming home to a place I'd never been before. Her arms wrapped around my neck, pulling me closer, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I wasn't just fixing a tractor or a farm. We were fixing each other. When is it worth risking the safety of solitude for the terrifying, beautiful possibility of being truly seen by another? If you've ever had to make that choice, you know there's no easy answer. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.